Welcome back to the world history, where forgotten footsteps echo louder than modern roars. Today, we journey back to the smoky cradle of revolution, ambition, and destiny to witness how one man nearly ruled the entire world. Our story begins not on a battlefield, but on a rugged island in the Mediterranean, Corsica. Before the cannons thundered and empires crumbled, there was a boy named Napoleon Bonaparte. Born into modest Corsican nobility, Napoleon wasn't France's son by birth, he was her challenger by will. Clad in a striking blue uniform, with golden epaulets gleaming under the battlefield sun, the young general's intense stare would one day shake thrones across Europe. At just 24 years old, Napoleon made his first explosive mark during the siege of Toulon. Amidst cannon fire and the screams of chaos, he seized victory for the revolutionaries. In the smoke-filled night, a new star rose from the ashes of war, not just a soldier, but a tactician, a visionary of conquest. Then came Austerlitz, the battle of the three emperors. Under a blood-red dawn, with snow blanketing the fields, Napoleon orchestrated one of the greatest military maneuvers in history. His army moved like clockwork, splitting coalitions and freezing monarchs in terror. At Austerlitz, he wasn't just a general, he was a god of war. Zooming out, Napoleon's vision wasn't limited to the battlefield. On the map of Europe, his empire stretched like wildfire, bold, aggressive, and relentless. Like glowing arteries of ambition, his influence flowed from Paris to the edges of the Mediterranean, reshaping history with every step. In the war tent, far from the drums of battle, Napoleon bent over his maps by candlelight. Surrounded by his inner circle, he plotted movements like a master chess player, every province a piece to be claimed. It was here that the real conquest began, not with blood, but with brilliance. But no image captures his mythos better than the iconic crossing of the Alps. On a blinding white steed, cape flaring in the mountain wind, Napoleon defied nature itself. The snow was deep, the terrain cruel, but destiny doesn't wait for dry roads. He rode toward legend, as if the Alps were mere hills beneath his boots. With power came the crown. In Notre Dame Cathedral, amidst candlelight and incense, Napoleon took his place not just as ruler, but emperor. But in a stunning twist, he didn't let the Pope crown him. He crowned himself. That moment echoed like thunder, no divine right. No permission, only dominance. His sword, gilded, etched with symbols of glory, lay atop the very maps he once studied. Every scratch told a tale, battles fought, empires bent, kings humbled. For Napoleon, steel was diplomacy and conquest. Was negotiation. But as triumph after triumph fell into his lap, the specter of Waterloo loomed ahead. Though that battle belongs to another chapter, the seeds of destiny, both glorious and doomed, were planted in these early campaigns. In one chilling scene, his soldiers cross a burning bridge, flames licking the sky. They march on through smoke and fire, just as their leader had always done, not as mere men, but as instruments of history. The world would soon tremble before the emperor of ambition. As Napoleon's empire expanded, Europe trembled under the pressure of his ambition. One of his most tense and symbolic encounters was with Tsar Alexander I of Russia. In the frozen silence of a winter landscape, they met as titans, each masking caution with courtesy. Their handshake was brief, but the message was loud. Two worlds had collided, and only one could survive. Behind the civility, both leaders were already planning their next move. Back in his war chamber, deep into sleepless nights, Napoleon pored over maps, surrounded by glowing globes and tattered battle charts. His war tent was no mere shelter, it was a command center of genius. Lit by flickering candles and the weight of history, he calculated every risk, every march, every sacrifice. Europe was a puzzle, and he held every piece in his hands. A sweeping view of Europe told the story more clearly than any journal. Red arrows pierced across borders like flames through parchment. From Paris, his reach extended like a storm through Spain into Austria, across Italy, and deep into Prussia. His military genius didn't just build an empire. It rewrote the map. Entire nations were swallowed, old monarchies toppled, and ancient traditions shattered. But his ambition didn't sleep. After exile in Elba, he did the unthinkable. He escaped, disguised, quiet, determined. With the sea as his ally and time as his enemy, Napoleon boarded a small ship under stormy skies. The winds of fate blew toward France, and history braced for his return. The world had written him off, but he was writing a comeback. As he stepped ashore in France, torches lit the dark with a fire that would soon spread across the continent once again. Soldiers once loyal to the Bourbon kings now dropped their weapons in awe. They didn't arrest him, they embraced him. He was the emperor reborn. The return was more than a march, it was a miracle. But Napoleon didn't just conquer land, he sought to transform law and society. The Napoleonic Code became his greatest intellectual weapon. In an era of confusion, his civil reforms brought clarity. Justice, property rights, and secular law etched in scrolls and signed with purpose cemented his rule deeper than any sword ever could. Still, the British stood firm across the Channel, watching every move. On a cliffside, Napoleon gazed. Across the grey sea toward England, his greatest prize, forever just out of reach. The waves mocked him with distance. Behind him, cannons waited. Before him, the impossible, yet he never looked away. In royal halls and candlelit courts, kings whispered in fear. Monarchs who once scoffed at the Corsican upstart now trembled as their kingdoms burned. Some fled, others begged. All realized. Too late, he wasn't just a man, he was a movement. A firestorm wrapped in a uniform. And in the cities he conquered, the people often welcomed him. Triumphal arches rose, golden banners waved, and Napoleon rode through streets lined with flowers and hope. For them, he was not a tyrant, but a liberator, a force of order in a collapsing world. On a throne built by blood and brilliance, his gray coat and iconic bicorn hat rested like sacred relics, symbols of a man who turned ambition into empire. He hadn't ruled the world, but for a moment the world had bent toward him. Napoleon's downfall didn't begin with a single cannon or a single enemy, it began with snow. The Russian winter was a monster no strategy could defeat. As the Grand Army trudged back from Moscow, the burning ambition that once lit Europe dimmed beneath freezing skies. The icy wind ripped through uniforms, horses collapsed in the snow, and soldiers froze where they stood. It was no longer a war, it was survival, and even that was slipping through their frostbitten fingers. From the glory of palaces to the desolation of exile, Napoleon found himself a prisoner of the sea. On the remote island of St. Helena, surrounded by crashing waves and empty horizons, the man who once commanded millions was now watched by a few guards. He stood on the cliffs, staring into infinity, not at what lay ahead, but what was lost behind. No maps, no allies. Only memory and silence. Once, he'd stood proudly in the grandeur of the Vatican, face to face with Pope Pius VII. He bent the church to his will, crowned himself in defiance of tradition, and reshaped the divine order to match his own. Now in isolation, the great emperor had no crown, no choir, no sanctuary, just the distant echoes of a power he could no longer touch. Napoleon's life played out like a legend painted on a living canvas. One moment, a Corsican outsider, the next, Emperor of France. Behind his shadow stood every version of himself, each transformation fueled by fire. His rise was a symphony of revolution, war, and reform, every note louder than the last. And yet, as history turned the page, the silence after the crescendo spoke the loudest. When his body was finally returned to France, it wasn't buried like a man, it was enshrined like an idea. The streets filled with mourning soldiers and black banners. Drums beat a slow rhythm of grief. He was no longer a conqueror, but a symbol of ambition, glory, and inevitable collapse. Death did not erase his name, it engraved it deeper. Long. Before exile, Napoleon would sit for hours staring at the globe, firelight dancing across his face. Every spin represented a new opportunity, a new campaign. He believed that the world was his to shape, not simply to study. Even as defeat loomed, that same spark of conquest never truly left his eyes. Crowds once cheered his name in the streets of Paris. Men waved tricolor flags. Women tossed flowers and children climbed lampposts to see the hero who'd risen from revolution. He promised glory, and for a moment he delivered it. For those who lived in chaos, he was order incarnate. The streets didn't echo with fear, but with faith. Though they never dueled face to face, history immortalized his rivalry with the Duke of Wellington. It was more than generals, it was a clash of worlds. One stood for ancient order, the other for disruptive genius. At Waterloo, their fates collided in a storm of mud, smoke, and legend. Time, however, erodes even the strongest empires. Statues cracked, banners faded, and the emblems of conquest were slowly swallowed by moss and silence. The world moved on, but the questions Napoleon raised about power, ambition, and destiny still lingered in every fallen stone. Today, his ghost hovers over the glittering cities of modern Europe. From high above, the emperor who once dreamed of ruling the world watches as history unfolds without him. Lights blink across the continent like memory's proof that he didn't conquer the world, but he did shape it forever.